Bonjour y'all. Today we are diving into a new tutorial series about RenderMan 26 that is gonna focus on the XPU rendering. For this demo, I will use some project files that are created by Harsh Agrawal that you can find on renderman.pixar.com. You can totally download the project files here and that will get you started. There might be a Maya scene that you need to export as an alembic, but you will have some very nice geometry that Harsh took the time to sculpt and texture. We might do something that differs a little bit in terms of workflow, but overall I will try to recreate the same sort of setup within Houdini 20.5 using Solaris and RenderMan. Don't forget to check out Harsh Agrawal's website. He isn't just a talented VFX artist, he is also quite a painter, as you can see. Some very mesmerizing watercolor scenes. Whether you are looking to support this artist or look for inspiration, check out his website, harshagrawalart.com. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Alright, I got here the scene where I rendered the final image, and you know what? It's actually running fairly fast with XPU, just considering that we have complex material and something with displacement. For the cookies, we have some refraction for the bottle that is refracting an object like milk that have SSS, so subsurface scattering. I could see myself using it more in the future. So in this scene, I'm not gonna show you the whole process. This is actually described on my Gumroad if you're interested. You have this product that exactly show the whole process from start to finish. So if there is an area in particular you're more interested, you are welcome to check it out. In the meantime, here I propose you to do a overall breakdown of the scene. What are the key points to keep in mind to create an image like that? Some of the RenderMan gotcha on Solaris that you might face. And yeah, hopefully that will be useful. So let's get into it. I will set things to OpenGL for now. And the first thing I did obviously was loading the scene, an alembic from Harsh Agrawal for the project files that were available on Pixar.com. So definitely grab these if not already, because that's a cool little scene. It's coming with some texture. I'm not necessarily using all of them because sometimes I like to try my own things with procedural and whatnot. But yeah, that's in there. So the first thing I did was loading an alembic of this scene with a sublayer, and we get basically this hierarchy of geometry. And yeah, it's quite a few stuff, and we have a camera that's available in here. And the first thing I did was somewhat changing a bit the composition. First thing was just reducing a bit the size of the tray. That's just a preference I had because I found that it was fitting more the horizontal format, while I think Harsh was keeping in mind a more vertical format for the his final image. So that's where I decided to tweak a little bit, few things to get things to work as a horizontal full HD sort of resolution. So I got a few things in this geometry network. Some edit node that just allow me to quickly edit some geom like this one. So the way it works is really just moving a specific primitives in this case. You can always press enter, S to select, and T to move things around. So yeah, that's all I did here. Then we have something, a sub modify cookies. So I'll get into this one a bit later when we talk about the material of this one, because I needed to store some attributes on these cookies, and this attribute paint was actually useful to get some nice variation. So we'll go back to that one shortly, but otherwise sub modify this one is actually to change a bit the the mesh itself. And I wanted to expand a bit this softbox. So the way I do that is simply in here, adding the geometry I wish to modify. You can always select using S and shift click to add whatever you want in your selection, drag and drop, and you got your primitive setup. Just make sure to unpack USD primitive to polygon. You can dive in there, add an edit sub, press enter and select any points, or if you wish to select primitive specifically, you can press, I think, 4 and then T to move stuff. So yeah. So that's pretty much all I did here, was just expand this box a little bit more. Again, to fit the horizontal format. We have here some stuff like mesh bottle. So this is a mesh slop, and all it does is deal with the subdivision scheme in that case. That is set up to be Catmull-Clark, because you can actually notice how the geometry is pretty low res, which is fine, but is actually meant to be subdivided in that case. So that's something you definitely want to handle. There's multiple ways to go about that I'm detailing in the long form, but one way is to use a mesh slop, and we can see the difference in render. So let's actually use RenderMan here. So obviously there's no light, but you'll see without it, things tend to look pretty faceted, and with it starting to look much better. Same when it comes to the tray. Right now my tray is not subdivided. If I subdivide it, we're getting some nice round corner, which is exactly what we want there. Then I have something for the displacement of the cookies. So if I put this on right now, nothing's going to happen because we don't have any material, obviously, but keep in mind, if you want to enable the displacement on some geometry, you will need a render geometry settings, and in RenderMan prototype attributes, you have this enable displacement. And in my case, I set the coordinate system to world. I just prefer to deal with world units, since sometimes, you know, you do some weird transforms and scale of objects. So I do feel like having world unit is preferable. And the radius is basically corresponding to the bound of the displacement. So if your value is a bit too low, you may have some clipping within your displacement. If it's too high, well, you're kind of doing some unnecessary computation for generating displacement, which is not optimal, but well, still better than getting clipping, I guess. So that's pretty much all I'm doing here. This mesh bottle, more, bottle shape. We have something for the milk, something for the mesh, and later we'll see, we'll talk about those render geometry settings once we talk about the refraction, because that's an important one if you want to actually have light go through your geometry. So let's have a look at that. I have here a material library that contains all my shaders. So I created some Pixar material builder. So you can simply type in RenderMan and you'll have this network where you can create all type of Pixar related materials. My favorite ones are obviously you have layer, you have the surface, Pixar surface. So there's different things you can use, and I'll try to explain which one I tend to use for specific case. Now in RenderMan 26, you also have llama shaders, which kind of give me some throwback to my time at ILM, because those are actually shaders they created and that are being used in Katana and Solaris. So that's fun stuff. The only thing, the main gotcha with this type of material is they are not XPU compatible. So I wanted to stay away from this, but maybe in another tutorial at one point we'll talk about those llama shaders, because it's a pretty neat way to layer material in my opinion. Okay, so let's get into the material. The first thing is the cookies. Obviously, that's the hero here. It's not actually that crazy, the material, but there's a couple of things happening. And overall, the way I'm dealing with the material is using this Pixar layer mixer that makes two different types of material, one being the chocolate. I could put a yellow color for this one to so it stands out, and one for the cookies. So the way we layer stuff is actually, I'm not gonna say convoluted, but it's a bit funky in a way where we are using this Pixar layer mix to layer Pixar layer, and you're using the Pixar layer mix to mix those, but you still need to input this Pixar layer mix within a Pixar surface. I don't think any of these parameters here would matter. It's just about inputting a material so that you can plug it to the output collect that collect the final BRDF. And you know what? In most cases, most render would allow you to just connect things, but in that case, that doesn't work. That's why we have to plug things into this Pixar surface. As you start to guess, I'm separating those two materials. The chocolate is actually super simple, where you just have a main color. It got some specular, and the specular in that case is handled through this face color and edge color. So the face color will mostly be about the specular that is facing the camera, while edge color is the specular that is focusing on the sides. And that's what I primarily use in most cases. Unless I'm doing maybe metal, you would, something very shiny like a chrome, you would need to increase the face color. So that's the main trick here. But other than that, there's nothing really special to it. The cookies is a bit more tricky to create the color, because in that case, I'm actually starting from a simple color. Actually, I didn't even use a texture, but just this color that I'm trying to texture a bit. So I'll show you a quick material breakdown. Let's apply these. Actually, to speed up a bit the render in XPU for this demo, I will prune everything but the cookies, and will also turn off the displacement. So the first thing with this prune lob, that's pretty useful to make the object invisible, is to, well, use it to isolate or kill whatever you want. In my case, I can simply delete the cookies, but I can also say prune unselected to reverse this action. In my case, I had some primitives that were already defined by a collection called cookies. And this collection is something I usually define after we set up the geometries, the hierarchy, and so on, so that I can create different collection of things that I might be tempted to reuse through several lobs. Like these cookies, this is the collection I choose to name. It's containing all the primitives that are under this pattern. And this cookies collection is being called in different nodes, like this displays cookies that I mentioned earlier have these settings on. If I don't want this to be enabled, I can simply turn it off, and it should be good to go. But same when it comes to applying shader in my scene. I like to use collection whenever possible to make things easier. So yeah, in that case, I'm doing that to isolate these cookies, and we are ready to launch XPU. Yeah, sounds cool. One trick that you can use when you press D in the viewport, you will have the display options, and this corresponds to the render settings being used in viewport. And as you can see, by default, the integrator is being set to path tracer. You could also set it to picture visualizer if you have, well, some stuff you would want to check. In my case, just the shader might be much faster to run this BXDF if you simply need shaded or flat, or just seeing the normals of the object. You have the ways to actually see things this way, or even like this matcap style. It doesn't seem to work here. But anyway, you get the idea. You can also display the wireframe if it's helpful. Okay, so if I dive in the cookies, this is the material I have. Might sound a bit crazy, but really it's not that complicated. I have in red the color base that is loaded through a Pixar texture. It doesn't actually have any base texture, simply a color that I'm using as missing color. And by the way, you can press X if you want to visualize the current selected node. That facilitates things. In my case, I'm relying just on this color that I'm gonna color correct through different Pixar color correct. And I'm using the input mask to locally color correct things. Like this is basically darkening the cavities. You can see the color correcting value is 0.2, decreasing the overall gain on this color, but through this mask that was provided in the project files. We have a mask that is basically a Luma key here that extracts the shadows. So if we have some cracks and things, that could help us get some fake occlusion, and also a mask for the chocolate chip itself that would benefit a separate shader with more spec for the chocolate chip. One thing that is worth flagging with RenderMan, it's not a good idea if you want to use JPEGs, PNG. A good workflow would be to convert this texture into another format called TXT or text. So let me show you. We actually have a tool provided by Pixar called Texture Manager that allow you to convert textures on the fly. You can even parse scene. Well, it's gonna find anything that is already loaded. We want to change a few things. First, make sure if you are using some tileable texture that this ST wrap mode is set to periodic so that you can end up tiling things. And one other thing is when it comes to bump and normal, it is worth setting this to normal map, the bump to bump map. If it's already cached, well, you could just right click and reconvert. In my case, it was already converted. That's why it's already doing these green flags. Okay, so that might not be your case. So I'm reconverting everything, make sure they have the proper treatment for these specific textures. At this point, you'll notice you have some .tx. That's what I've exclusively been using through this tutorial. So whenever I need to load a map, I'm loading one of these. And when it comes to procedural setup, let's go back to the network. And the more procedural aspect rely on using some fractals to deal with both the displacement and the coloring, where I'm using a Pixar fractal with a noise of type Gabor. You have different type. I found the Gabor one to be pretty useful with this turbulent look. So yeah, I'm using that, and I'm using similar ones like this one that have a slightly higher frequency. Yeah, higher frequency to displace and color correct things. So basically how that works, I'm using that to apply some reddish color. It might be hard to see. Let me increase the saturation. But yeah, you can see the effect of this color correct. And what I'm doing on the next one, I'm darkening things, but I do want to darken in some places that was not affected by the previous max. That's why I have this Pixar mix. That's basically using the low frequency noise I was using here as a mask, and simply using another noise to filter things. So yeah, that's actually pretty simple. So just mixing with these black values to remove the areas that might not actually require some darkening. So yeah, that's just to avoid some weird mix of colors. And in that case, I think it was doing a decent job. Next thing is color correcting through another type of procedural, which are attributes that you can, well, store on your geometry. In my case, I mentioned earlier, I created this Pixar mask. I created this mask attribute through a submodify. So let me go back. I'll rewind a bit on this part where I was doing this submodify. And I was actually here using an attribute paint and using some brush to just paint some additional data that would inform where I want my color correct to take place. You would have multiple ways to create attribute, obviously. I'm not going to mention them all, but you can use vex, you can use point up, you can use attribute noise, you can use like mask from geometry, mask from target, from geometries if you need to create an attribute based on another geometry, mask, well, you have my mask builder, which is actually a HDA for Houdini Indie that I'm offering on my Gumroad for a small price, and kind of does all kind of things like based on height, based on occlusion and that thing. So even though it's pretty old at this point, I still use it quite a bit to create custom mask for SUP manipulation and so on. So yeah, I found that still fairly convenient to create stuff, but you can obviously do the same using VOP, using Vex, and all the nodes and labs tool that. But in my case, I manually wanted to create this attribute paint to get the edges of these cookies. That remind me actually curvature. That's a good one. Labs measure curvature to actually capture the edges, whether they are concave or convex. You can kind of get a decent starting point with that. But yeah, that's what I choose to do here, and using this mask into this Pixar attribute to color correct the color of these cookies. And that's kind of creating these darker edges, making it look a bit more tasty and baked, and yeah, that's the whole idea there. So it's a fairly simple looking texture, and the complexity also comes from, first, the model look great, obviously. So thanks Harsh Agrawal for the project files again, and you can basically enhance it through displacement. So I turned the displacement off, but the idea is similar in a way where we layer different noise frequencies or type to achieve some sort of complexity here. Oh, I don't think I can visualize this one because the displace is not maybe working right now. But that would be a much higher frequency since it's 2.8 and this one was like 0.2. So it's really a much more high frequency displacement that I'm layering through this color layer. So that's a very convenient way to layer some float like for displacement. By default, those noise are getting a value between 0 to 1, and I'm actually using this Pixar arithmetic to subtract a value that would kind of offset the values in the negative world so that we prevent the cookies from inflating as we displace them. So that's one trick I like to use to actually compensate for displacement inflating the model. And yeah, that's going through this Pixar displace, and Pixar displace is going through this output collect. So that's the overall workflow with simple color, with some displacement, and you can do a lot through that. So that's pretty much it for the cookies. There are other elements like, well, the bottle. And for this one, I might show you with the tray so that we actually can see the shadows and, well, the effect of the refraction. So let me get table and tray. So for this one, we'll start to use some lights. And yeah, I got my lighting set up here, so I'll talk about that in details later. But in the meantime, I will just use this first key light to show you the result with some shadows. And when it comes to glass, the tricky part will be handling the refraction. So it's not necessarily super tricky, but there's a few gotchas when it comes to Pixar. So let me go in the glass material and show you a little bit how it's how I made it. So as you can see, there's still this Pixar layer workflow, and we have just one layer that is taking care of the glass itself and one for some dust. So the dust is really just a grayish color that come on top of the glass. Let me simply plug this one so that we just see the effect of the glass itself. It's looking still pretty slow to render because I'm using some refraction roughness, and that's something that I'm controlling in glass right here. So as you can see, the refraction gain is up, and I actually turned a little bit of refraction roughness to get some murkiness in that glass, so we don't feel that it is completely clean. You can obviously set it to 0, and it shouldn't blur any refraction and make things a bit faster. So in my case, I did a little bit, like 0.125 or something like that. And index of refraction of glass is 1.5. And you'll notice by default, this might not, the light might not go through your glass properly for one reason, is because you might need to actually define some property on your glass geometry, your bottle. You might want to put it into a render geometry setting, and in the RenderMan tab under instance attribute and trace, you have these parameters. So that's the amount of bounce that the light can actually do. And if I set that to 0, you see that it's completely black because it's not able to go through the glass at all, or even bounce on it. If I have one bounce, it's gonna just bounce one, so we start to see one layer of specular. If I set it to 2, it starts to be able to go through, so we start to see some things happening. But that would really depend on the amount of surface that your light has to cross. In the case of this bottle, you may have a thickness, so that means it's going to go through at least 4 surface before it gets pretty clear. And just as a safety, because that's a kind of complex objects, you would at least need 8, I think, before it gets much nicer. Because you also have, in that case, some weird geometry thing happening. So I tend to increase it a lot more just to be sure, you know, and create a nice glass reflection and refraction that would be controlled through this specular depth. Yeah. The max diffuse is the amount of bounce for the diffuse. I would say it's not as important if you don't use it for your bottle. Like in that case, I don't think it has much impact, to be fair. I'm not sure why I turned it on, but yeah, I think just maybe for like the dust and anything that's kind of getting layered on top, I would maybe set it to 3 or 4. Anyway, looking at the material of this glass, I will add this Pixar layer mixer, and yeah, you can see how things are being layered. And again, it's through some textures that were provided with the project file. So you have like this stain that's pretty cool. It's nice detailed. One of the thing is this Pixar roughness. So that's another roughness map that's provided that I'm using through a Pixar remap to actually control the amount of roughness I want. In my case, I'm doing input range to kind of clip the values a bit and remap things between 0.1 and something like 0.5 worked fine for me. And that's going through reflection roughness. Yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's obviously this Pixar normal map. So this one is allowing me to get this, well, let's go back in camera view. Yeah, so the normal map is giving this kind of nice detail, and it's connected in the bump normal of the Pixar layer. So just make sure to connect it both to the dust and to this glass layer. So that's the main thing. When it comes to the tray, that's another kind of material. So the tray itself is fairly simple. You'll notice this network that's a bit, probably the only one where with the table where I use this sort of setup, where you basically have a texture that's basically a tileable texture that I'm controlling through a Pixar manifold 2D. So this would basically allow me to share the amount of repetition, the angle, and the position of this texture through this Pixar manifold. So in that case, since those textures are part of the same texture set, it allows me to ensure that they will definitely share the same coordinate. So that's the convenient thing with Pixar Manifold 2D. And yeah, that's simply something that I'm using to remap the glossiness into a roughness, and yeah, doing something pretty low in value in the end, I guess, for this one. It's like, yeah, actually it's pretty rough looking at it, but well, the part of my specular setting is mostly dealing with the face color, so that's what I've been using here. And face color is mostly what would drive the metallic aspect of things, since it's what specular is facing the camera angle. The edges, I decided to leave it to a uniform value, but that's really up to you. And yeah, some normal to create a bit of scratches. So that's pretty much it. When it comes to the milk, let's have a look at just the milk volume itself. So it doesn't really look great in that condition. I had to sort of boost the gain a little bit, mostly because through the glass it gets a bit darker, obviously. And yeah, right now the light might be pretty strong. The display is not the best through this view. And I'm using some SSS to actually scatter the light inside this mesh. So it looks a bit waxy in theory, but let me do a proper render. So yeah, that's just a preview render. So anytime you are dealing with more complex material, whether it's the refraction of the glass or something more like liquid, you would probably want to double check and do a rough render at least. And yeah, that's kind of the look of it. So it's fairly simple, mostly SSS, some specular, and that's really it when it comes to the milk. The way I'm rendering, by the way, is using this RenderMan setting and using this USD render rope. I found that to get it to work, well, you have to have render product in here, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You can render to and play. I have here a camera focus that might not be helping us for the renders, making it extra noisy, but well, at this point we covered most of the materials, and what I want to talk about now is the lighting. So let me restore this scene a little bit, and the thing I will do, I will disable this assign material that basically deal with all the assignments, simply like assigning the primitive and the material that I created in my material library that I want to assign. And yeah, I have always a default material applied before, just to make sure everything will have some default properties. And I usually start lighting using this default material, mostly because it's faster to actually compute something like that than dealing with worrying about the refraction, the SSS, and so on. So this is what it looks like with the key light that we set up, and I'm using a rectangle light. So that's the one right here that's shooting some light in that direction. There's a bit of shaping with this spotlight, but a lot of it is also being driven through Bonjour, and Pixar filter blocker. So that allow me to drive exactly where I want my light to start and finish. So when it comes to Bonjour, this one is very convenient because you basically have a gizmo when you press enter, and you can really define where you want your light to be starting and finishing, like if you would have some little doors next to your light that you would adjust and really crop what piece of light you want. So it doesn't control the direction. You can see that the shadow is remaining the same. It's just like filtering the light in that space, and you can rotate, translate, do anything with it. So that's something I really love about RenderMan. It's powerful light filters. And I wish Karma had this sort of gizmo to control light filters, because it does make things a lot easier to set up complex lighting. So yeah, the other one, this blocker, is basically doing the opposite. It's removing some light. And as you can see, I have this volume that's kind of removing some light on this side, because mostly the reflection and the light on the bottle was getting too much. So yeah, without, it's a bit brighter, and with it feels a bit darker, and that does make a difference when you add the materials. Then the next light is rim light, so kind of part of a more traditional lighting setup. Let me turn off the key light so we actually see what's up with this one. It's ready to contour a bit the edges of the cookies in the bottle. And again, I'm using some blocker. This one is here to contain a bit the light on the tray so that it doesn't spill everywhere. And I found that a little bit more dramatic than if it would light everything like so. Especially revealing the table. That's not where I want to draw the attention. Where I want to draw the attention is on these geometries, right? So yeah, Pixar blocker is a very nifty filter. I didn't even mention how to actually set them up, but it's really super simple. You can create your light filter. If you want, I don't know, a multiply filter, you can totally do that. And down there, you would basically find, right here, you would be able to set which light will benefit this filter. And in my case, I got my rim light. I could simply drag and drop it in here and use these to control a little bit more my lighting. If I want to crank up specifically the intensity, or have more control over the diffuse contribution, the specular contribution, color saturation. So it gives you a little bit more advanced feature than just the default settings of the light. So that can be a way to improve a bit your lighting. So yeah, in my case, I'm not interested in the filter. I will just simply turn it off, because again, with the reflection and everything, it does add up very fast. Yeah, so next type of light I want to show you was the dome light, and this one is really a simple kind of map that's being used on a sky dome. So there's not much to it, to be honest. Let me turn off this one. Yeah, so yeah, and I keep fairly low. It's mostly for the reflection on the bottle, but it's like this sort of studio. Yeah. So it's kind of an indoor map that brings some additional reflection down the line on the glass. So for that, maybe it's more interesting if I re-enable the material in the scene. Yeah, even then, yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but yeah, it does bring some reflection on it. Let me actually do a quick render. So yeah, with the quick render, you can see there's some more complexity on the reflection of this glass, and also on the tray. It's bringing some kind of warm tone that I think are beneficial. So yeah, this sky dome doesn't look like much, but it does add some realism to the reflection, whether it's on the tray, on the bottle, and overall make the lighting a bit more ambient so that it's not completely dark. And finally, the last light that I have here is a backlight. This backlight here is simply to light up the wall in the back. I will again disable this scene material to make things faster. Yeah, so you can see how that's kind of helping to make the foreground stand out a bit more. So that's why I really wanted to use a simple, and again, a rectangle light. It doesn't even have any filter, just like a bit of shaping with this spotlight mode, and getting this direction, so that once I'm adding all the other lights, like the rim light and the key light, it does help to make this little scene stands out a bit more. Without it, it felt probably a bit too dark. But here it maybe feel like, okay, there's a window or something that's kind of casting some light on that corner. So I thought that could be an interesting storytelling element. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the lighting. There's nothing really complex about it. I think the main feature is really just using the light filters to really control how I want every of this light to behave. All right, at this point, it's time to take care of the final output of our render. So let's expand a little bit this window and see what we have here. We're gonna use the integrator path tracer because it's first pretty easy to use, and also it's very efficient when it comes down to scene with very reflective, high specular sort of scene, and that's exactly what we have with the glass, with the tray and all that. So that should be actually very useful. First image output, let's make sure we create a proper destination for our render. We'll call that render maybe final. It's not gonna be final, but whatever. You can obviously export some AOVs in there. Let's put some basic one. I have beauty, direct diffuse, direct specular, mostly in case we would want to do some compositing. So let me see. I don't think we have any emissive. Maybe albedo, that's always useful. P world, sure, normal, okay. Maybe in another video we'll see how we can export like cryptomats and light LPEs for the lights, that sort of thing. But for now, I mostly want to focus on getting some noise-free render. But it's always good to have these AOVs. So let's get started. We'll go in integrator first. What do we have? We have the max indirect bounces. So this parameter basically controls the amount of bounce that you can have in your scene. If you set a value like 0, you would get basically just direct lighting and no bounce, which is not ideal. In our case, we have a pretty low light situation, but yeah, it's quite a few bounce with the tray and stuff. So I would say let's try to clamp the amount of bounce to 12. And then we have something, well, that is fairly important for the sample mode. You can choose to set that to BXDF or manual. The manual mode, what it does is mostly break down the different component of the material in case you need to sample one feature of the material more than another. If, for example, I want more sample in the specular, I could totally do that. But I'm absolutely not gonna do that. I will just leave this to BXDF to just control the whole amount. And I'm thinking value of 4 for those complex materials should be enough. Same for indirect sample. I think that is worth improving the quality in there. Then we have the Russian roulette. So if you are not familiar with the Russian roulette, let's just spend a minute there. In that case, it's very much the rays that are bouncing over a surface, and they have to decide if they really want to bounce or call it quits. Yeah, it's basically like flipping a coin, and if it's heads, well, the rays will keep bouncing and keep carrying more lights, though that would obviously cost more. And tails, the chrome says I'm done and it stops. That does save some render time. Now the smart part, it's not a 50-50 coin flip. The render is kind of like a sneaky casino dealer who would rig the game. If the ray is in a bright, important spot, like the milk glossy highlights, it's more likely to keep bouncing by maybe 80% chance. If it's in a dim, less important spot, like the shadowy cookie edge, well, that might drop to, let's say, 20%. So this rigging is based on how much light the ray is carrying. And the brighter rays get to live longer, while the dim ones get cut early. So depth, in this case, is the strict minimum amount of bounce before starting to terminate the ray. And the threshold, it determines the chance to get the ray killed. So if this is set too high, your ray may get terminated too quickly, while if it's too low, it may increase your render time for carrying tiny portion of light in dark areas, which will be useless. So in that case, I'm happy to leave it as is. When it comes to indirect clamping, what it does is really allow you to clump the final value of the specular, which is, in this case, a value of 10. If you decide to clump it to 1, the problem I have with that in a scene that is so high spec is that it could potentially tone down the indirect lighting, because now your specular and your material have less power, so that means the light is not gonna bounce as much. So that's why I'm tempted to actually increase it and say I want to clump the specular to a value of 20. Now, sweet. Let's keep going. Next panel, we have the sampling, which is a pretty important part of having a clean render. And this is a whole concept of adaptive sampling. You have the most important parameters here are dark falloff, pixel variance, min extra, max samples. I think we'll focus on that to get the job done. So what's adaptive sampling? Well, every pixel in your image needs sample, some little calculation of light rays that hits the surface. So more samples means less noise, but that means longer render time. Instead of using the same number of samples everywhere, the advantage of adaptive sampling is that it's pretty stingy with samples where they are not needed and very generous where they are needed. So that's a pretty sweet concept. And pixel variance, if the pixel is super noisy, like the refracted milk with its heavy SSS, it gets more sample. If it's clean, like a flat cookie surface, it gets fewer. So I think as a preview, you could decrease that to 0.01 if you want to keep your render fairly fast. For something more final, I would set that to 0.005 or even to 0.002, just because we also have quite a bit of defocus. So maybe I'll start with 0.05. Then we have the minimum and min extra, max sample. So all of these allow you to control, as you can guess, the amount of samples you're gonna get controlled through this pixel variance. So min sample is the least number of samples every pixel gets. So no matter what, it's like saying every cookies get at least 4 chocolate chip, even the boring ones. So if it needs more work, it has a backup plan with the min extra samples. And that's why we'll set this one to a value of 2 to 4, I would say is a good start. The min sample, I'm thinking something like 4. And max sample is like saying no cookie gets more than 100 chocolate chip, even if it's begging for more. In our case, we have 64 here. For our scene, I would say for previews, 256 would start to get cleaner, but for more final quality, something between 512 and 1024 would be a good idea. I'll try with this max sample. Then we have a feature here called Adapt All. It's like saying check every pixel to see if it needs more chocolate chip and not just the obvious messy one. So it's pretty thorough in its analysis, but definitely takes more time. So we're not gonna turn it on. Pretty happy with that. So I'm thinking let's have a look at a render and go render to disk. We'll go check the scheduler, and at this point we're just waiting for this to finish. All right, the render took about 3 minutes, which is very fast. In comparison, this took I think 40 seconds. So if I'm loading the render final 001, it's already looking a lot cleaner. We could still see some noise, especially on the bottle that's heavily refractive and a lot of roughness thing happening. So it's definitely a trickier one to sample. Same in the SSS, feels very noisy. So we'll try to address that. So let's go ahead. We'll go in the render settings. In terms of light, BXDF samples, well, those would mostly not directly affect the noise, but they can impact it. It's mostly how they interpret the surface and all that. In that sense, I think they do a decent job, but I think for final render, like, it's probably something we can push around 8, 12. And actually, it might be a bad thing to have light sample and BXDF sample with different values, especially with having SSS. That's not something that's recommended. So I would say having equal values might be safer. And maybe for final, we could push that to 12. Indirect sample could be 8. Let's go in the sampling. We haven't talked about the dark fall-off, I guess. But this one can be pretty important. It's like telling RenderMan, yo, don't stress about noise in dark spots like cookie shadow, because it's hard to see anyway. So it kind of let dark pixel get away with fewer samples. So higher values, that means fewer sample in shadows, while lower values means more even sampling. So you know what? That's something we could increase a bit. I don't think that would impact the noise in shadow, which seems pretty okay. Otherwise, the pixel variance, that's something for final render we might decrease to 0.001 or 0.002. But let's start with that. I'm thinking, I would say the minimum samples, something like 16, max sample 1024 to 2048. That would make the render much longer, but you know what? Even if there's still noise, I'll show you a trick to denoise actually the render. So even with this, actually, we could denoise it and probably get away with most of it, but still pretty messy around here. That's what I want to clean. So let's go with that. And in terms of extra sample, something between 4 to 8. I'll say 4. We could turn on adapt all. That might try to make the denoising more even. So let's try that. That will take a bit longer, of course. So yeah, let's try to roll with that and launch a new render. So let me see. Let's go. All right, got the render done. Took a bit less than 20 minutes. So let's have a look on render final 2. It's already looking a lot cleaner. So before, yeah, it was very noisy. Now it's still noisy, but much clearer, I would say. It's a tricky one because the refractive roughness is at 0.12, so it makes everything a little bit glossy. If we want to facilitate our life, we would definitely reduce the refraction roughness there. So potentially we are making our life a bit difficult here, but I kind of like the murky look. I'm just gonna use a trick to get rid of the final SSS noise that we see here. So the way I'm doing that's gonna be through copnet using Denoise AI. And it expects a normal and an albedo. So do I actually have that? Let's make sure. I will expand that. Let's make sure we actually extract all the AOVs. There we go. So we should have an albedo, and let's plug that in albedo, and we should have a normal. Okay, well, we're gonna use that, see if that works. And yeah, let's see what we get. So it doesn't like the source because it expects RGB. So let's actually convert this RGBA to RGB. And yeah, let's get rid of those. And as you can see, it's looking a hell of a lot cleaner now. So with yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. At this point, we can export these, do color grade in any other software, or do it even in Houdini. We had a lesson on my Gumroad about compositing the cloudscape, so you could totally reuse some of the techniques I was showing there to color grade, add some vignetting, grain, and all that stuff. But yeah, if you just want to export, we could just create a null here, go out, and we'll create a raw image output. And let's just take this null, put it in the cop path, and yeah, we'll set that comp render cookies 01.exr. If we want an EXR, you might need to tweak the color space. So right now the color space is sRGB and untoned, so you could potentially, in my case I like Rec 709. If we look at ACs, that's what we would get. I kind of like the contrast we get from ACs here. So potentially we could just set that in here and say the same settings. So Rec 709, and we said ACs. So let's render to disk. So that should be good. I'll also do an export with a JPEG because I'm lazy. So let's take this one and we'll render a JPEG. There we go. Render to disk. But this would end this tutorial on cookies and milk. And again, if you need any clarification about any step, you can find the full-length tutorial available on my Gumroad as part of this Houdini Solaris USD environment workflow subscription. You will notice this one is included as part of a collection of other tutorial series related to Houdini, Solaris, and proceduralism. I'm adding the link in the description of this video if you are interested in supporting the channel this way. If you already are or have been doing it, well, thanks a lot. That's always appreciated. Next thing coming on here will be more content around Houdini 21. It's not impossible we do a quick spooky series there for Halloween. Let's see. For any updates about tutorial projects and Q&As related to VFX software or the industry in general, I invite you to follow my newsletter/blog articles, trying to share for free some of the progress and rambles about some hot nerdy topics. So definitely come say hi. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.